The silence at the dinner table was deafening as my father slammed his fist down, rattling the china that had been in our family for generations. "You're dead to us," he spat, his face contorted with disgust. "No daughter of mine serves in a war and comes back, like this." My mother wouldn't even look at me, her eyes fixed on her barely touched food. Neither of them realized that the mortgage papers for their beloved family home had been transferred to my name just hours earlier. That I now legally owned the roof over their heads. I could have told them right then, watched their faces change, from righteousness to fear. But some wounds cut too deep for quick revenge. I sat there, still as stone, my right hand instinctively touching the prosthetic leg hidden beneath my dress pants. 3 tours in Afghanistan, a Purple Heart, and countless nights of PTSD nightmares had changed me in ways they couldn't, or wouldn't, understand. But that wasn't why they were disowning me. No, that would have been almost reasonable compared to the truth. "Rachel, how could you?" My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We raised you in the church. We gave you everything, and you repay us by choosing this lifestyle? By bringing that woman to Christmas dinner and announcing your engagement like it's something to celebrate?" My fiancée Sara had left an hour ago, tears streaming down her face after my father called her unspeakable names. I'd insisted she go, promising I'd handle this myself. Maybe that was my first mistake. Or maybe the mistake was believing that after everything, after nearly dying for my country, after fighting through months of rehabilitation, after finally finding love with someone who accepted all my broken pieces, my parents might actually choose me over their prejudice. The mortgage papers had been a desperate move, one I hadn't planned to execute. Just knowing I could, that I'd saved enough from my military pension and new cybersecurity job to buy the loan from the bank that was threatening foreclosure, had been my private insurance policy. A way to feel some control when everything else in my life had spiraled beyond recognition. "You need to leave this house," my father continued, each word precision-targeted like the IEDs I'd learned to spot on dusty roads. "Take your things and your perverted choices and never come back." I stood slowly, the phantom pain in my missing limb flaring as it always did in moments of stress. "You don't mean that, Dad," I said quietly. "Don't call me that. Not anymore." His eyes, the same hazel shade as mine, were cold and foreign. "We have no daughter." Something cracked inside me then, not like breaking, but like ice giving way to reveal dark water beneath. I nodded once and walked to the door, my gait uneven but my spine military straight. "I'll be back tomorrow to collect my things," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "You might want to check your mail in the meantime." I didn't wait for a response. Some battles can't be won with words alone. The night air was crisp with early autumn, the stars impossibly bright above the small Virginia town I'd grown up in. I'd spent my childhood mapping those constellations, dreaming of places beyond our tidy colonial house with its white picket fence and suffocating expectations. Those same stars had watched over me in Afghanistan's mountains, offering familiar patterns when everything else was chaos and danger. My car was parked at the curb, but I couldn't bring myself to get in yet. Instead, I stood in the driveway, looking back at the house that held every memory of my life before the military. The porch where I'd scraped my knee at 7. The oak tree I'd climbed to hide from my parents' arguments. The attic window where I'd first realized I was different from the other girls, not just because I wanted to serve my country, but because I couldn't force myself to want the future my parents had planned. I pulled out my phone and called Sara. She answered immediately. "Rach, how did it go after I left?" "About as well as a night patrol in Kandahar," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "They've disowned me, officially." Her sharp intake of breath carried through the line. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault. Don't." I cut her off. This was always going to happen. They were looking for a reason. If not you, it would have been something else that didn't fit their perfect vision. Where are you now? Do you need me to come get you? I glanced back at the house one last time. The dining room lights were still on, shadows moving behind the curtains. My parents probably already convincing themselves they'd done the right thing, the godly thing. No, I said. I'm going to the hotel. I need some time to think. About what? I touched the inside pocket of my jacket, where a copy of the mortgage transfer confirmation sat folded neatly. About whether I'm going to tell them I own their house now. Silence stretched between us, thick with implications. Rachel. Sara, finally said, caution in her voice. What exactly are you planning? The truth was, I didn't know. When I'd bought the mortgage, it had been a desperate attempt to save my childhood home from foreclosure after my father's business failed. A secret gift they never needed to know about. I'd planned to make the payments quietly, let them keep their pride. But now? I'm not planning anything, I said. Not tonight. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? We said our goodbyes and I finally got into my car. The dashboard clock read 9:42 p.m. Almost exactly 12 hours since I'd signed the papers transferring their mortgage into my name. 12 hours since I'd become, technically, their landlord. The irony wasn't lost on me. I checked into the Riverside Hotel, the same place where Sara and I had spent our first night together after running into each other at a veterans support group. Sara hadn't served, she was a trauma counselor. But she understood more about what I'd been through than my own flesh and blood ever tried to. The room was simple but clean, with a view of the James River. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let the tears come. Not delicate, dignified tears, but ugly, body-shaking sobs that tore from somewhere primal inside me. I cried for the 18-year-old who'd enlisted to pay for college after my parents refused to support my rebellious choice of computer science over their preferred nursing degree. I cried for the 24-year-old who'd woken up in a field hospital with one less leg and a lifetime of nightmares ahead. I cried for the woman who'd finally found the courage to love openly, only to have her family reject her completely. When the tears finally stopped, I felt hollow but somehow lighter. I pulled out the mortgage papers and spread them on the hotel desk. The language was dense with legal terminology, but the essentials were clear. I owned the property. I could maintain the current terms, modify them, or even initiate foreclosure proceedings. Power I never wanted. Power I now had. My phone buzzed with a text from my younger brother, Jason, the only family member who'd ever really seen me. Just heard what happened. They're wrong. Call me when you can. Love you, sis. At least there was that. Not everyone had disowned me. I showered, letting the hot water sluice over my aching body, careful with the prosthetic as I'd learned to be. In the mirror afterward, I barely recognized myself. My military short hair had grown out enough to curl around my ears. The scar on my collarbone peeked above my tank top, a souvenir from the IED that had taken my leg and two of my squad mates. My eyes looked older than my 30 years, shadowed with experiences most civilians couldn't comprehend. Who was I now? Daughter? Not anymore, apparently. Soldier? Not actively, though that identity was carved into my bones. Fiancé? Yes, happily. Homeowner? Ironically, yes, of a house I'd just been banished from. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the day I'd decided to enlist. My father had called it a phase, something I'd regret when I grew up and wanted a real family. My mother had cried for days, telling anyone who would listen that she'd failed as a parent. Neither of them came to my boot camp graduation. They hadn't visited me in the hospital after the explosion either. I'd told myself it was the distance, the expense of flying to Germany where I'd been stabilized before transfer back to Walter Reed. Jason had come, though, using his college savings. For the ticket. He'd been the one to hold my hand through the worst of the pain, to make the nurses laugh when everything seemed dark, to help me take my first steps with the prosthetic. My parents had finally visited once I was back stateside, staying a stilted hour in my hospital room, uncomfortable with the reality of my injuries. My mother had asked if I'd considered growing my hair out, now that this military business is over. My father had talked about his golf game. Neither had mentioned my missing leg, as if by not acknowledging it, they could pretend it didn't exist. That should have been my first clue that there were parts of me they would never accept. The physical changes were just the beginning. How could I have expected them to embrace who I truly was, who I loved, when they couldn't even look at my wounds without flinching? I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke to sunlight streaming through the cheap hotel curtains. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Jason and a text from Sara saying she was bringing coffee and breakfast to my room. I sat up, the events of the previous night crashing back like a wave. I had decisions to make. Complicated, life-altering. Decisions that would affect not just me, but my parents, Sara, and any chance of future reconciliation. The mortgage papers still lay spread on the desk where I'd left them. I gathered them carefully, folded them along their original creases, and placed them back in my jacket pocket. Whatever I decided, it wouldn't be done in anger. I'd seen enough destruction in war to know that revenge, however justified, rarely brings peace. Sara arrived with bagels and strong coffee, her kind eyes searching my face as I opened the door. "You okay?" she asked, setting the food down and wrapping her arms around me. I leaned into her embrace, drawing strength from her steadiness. "Not yet," I answered honestly. "But I will be." Sara watched me sip my coffee in silence, respecting the storm she knew was raging inside me. That was one of the countless reasons I loved her. She understood when to push and when to simply exist, beside me in my darkness. "They never understood me," I finally said, picking at a bagel I had no appetite for. Not when I was a kid reading military history instead of teen magazines. Not when I enlisted instead of going to the Christian college they'd chosen. Not when I came home broken, and certainly not now. "You're not broken, Rachel," Sara said firmly, her counselor voice slipping through. "You're adapted. There's a difference." I smiled despite myself. How many times had she corrected me on this point during our sessions, before we crossed the professional line into something deeper? "What they did was cruel," she continued, tucking a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear. "But I need to know what you're thinking about this mortgage situation. That's a lot of power to suddenly have over people who just hurt you deeply." Reached for the papers in my jacket, which hung over the desk chair. "I bought it to help them," I explained, unfolding the documents. "Dad's construction business has been struggling since the recession. 3 months ago, Jason let slip that they were behind on payments, facing foreclosure. I had my military pension, good savings, and the new cybersecurity job pays well. It made sense to buy the loan from the bank." "Without telling them?" I shrugged. "You've met them. They'd never accept financial help from me, especially not after I came out last year. Dad would rather lose the house than take charity from his disappointment of a daughter." Sara frowned. "So you became their secret landlord?" "Basically. I was just going to make the payments, let them think the bank had offered some kind of restructuring they'd never know." I tossed the papers onto the bed between us. "But now you're considering using it as leverage," Sara finished, no judgment in her voice, just concern. "Or punishment," I admitted, the word bitter on my tongue. "I could start eviction proceedings tomorrow if I wanted to." Sara took my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "But would that heal anything, Rachel? Or would it just create more pain?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Jason's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, little brother," I answered, putting him on speaker. "Jesus, Rach, finally." His voice came through, tight with stress. "Where are you? Are you okay?" "I'm at the riverside. Sarah's with me. I'm surviving." A heavy sigh. "I just got home from Philadelphia an hour ago. Mom called, hysterical, saying you'd chosen sin and they'd had to ask you to leave. Dad wouldn't even come to the phone." "That's a creative interpretation of events," I said, anger flaring again. "They didn't ask me to leave, Jace. They told me I was dead to them, that they have no daughter." "Christ," he muttered. "I'm so sorry, Rach. For what it's worth, I told them they're being ridiculous, that I'm ashamed of how they're acting." Lump formed in my throat. Jason had always been my defender, even as a kid 6 years my junior. When neighborhood boys had teased me for wanting to play war instead of house, Jason had followed me loyally, plastic rifle in hand, despite being only 5 years old. "Thanks, Jace," I managed, "but don't put yourself in their crosshairs. Not for me." "Too late," he said with a humorless laugh. "Apparently supporting my deviant sister makes me equally unwelcome under their roof. I'm packing a bag now." "Sara?" And I exchanged alarmed glances. "They kicked you out too?" I asked. Not in so many words. "But Dad said I needed to choose a side. And when I chose yours, Mom started crying about having lost both her children to the world. So yeah, I'm leaving before this gets uglier." I pinched the bridge of my nose, guilt mixing with my anger. "Jace, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," he interrupted firmly. "You're my sister. You've always had my back. Now I have yours." My eyes burned with unshed tears. "Where will you go?" "I've got a buddy in Richmond who said I can crash on his couch until I figure things out. Speaking of which, what's your plan? Sarah's place?" I looked at Sara, who nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, for now," I told him. "I need to go back to the house tomorrow to get my things." "Want company for that?" I considered it. Having Jason. There would make it easier, but also risked making the situation even more volatile. "No, I think I need to do this myself, but thanks." "Your call." "Listen, I should finish packing before the parentals get back from their emergency prayer meeting about their wayward children." The eye roll was audible in his voice. "I'll call you once I'm settled at Mike's." After we hung up, Sara and I sat in stunned silence. The fallout was spreading, casualties mounting. All because I'd finally decided to live truthfully. "I never wanted Jason to get caught in the crossfire," I murmured, staring at my cooling coffee. "He's the golden boy, the one who did everything right in their eyes. Christian college, business, degree, good church-going Republican. Except he loves his sister unconditionally," Sara pointed out, "which apparently makes him suspect too." I stood abruptly, needing to move, to do something with the energy surging through me. Anger, grief, guilt, all of it swirling into a familiar cocktail that reminded me too much of combat hypervigilance. I paced the small hotel room, my prosthetic leg making a slightly different sound every other step. "I was willing to keep the peace for so long," I said, more to myself than to Sara. "Visited on holidays, listened to their not-so-subtle comments about finding the right man and giving them grandchildren. Let them introduce Sara as my roommate at Cousin Becky's wedding." I stopped pacing, facing the window that overlooked the river. I kept giving, and all they did was take. Sara came to stand beside me, her reflection joining mine in the glass. "What are you going to do about the mortgage?" That was the question, wasn't it? The nuclear option sitting in my pocket. I could devastate them with a few signatures, a legal filing. Make them feel as homeless as they'd made me feel last night. "I don't know yet," I admitted. Part of me wants to hurt them as badly as they've hurt me. But another part still loves them, Sara finished softly. I nodded, throat tight. They're still my parents, despite everything. We spent the rest of the day in a strange limbo. Sara Went to her apartment to get us fresh clothes, returning with takeout Chinese food that neither of us had much appetite for. We watched mindless TV, made half-hearted attempts at planning our wedding, and carefully avoided further discussion of what tomorrow would bring. That night, I dreamed of Afghanistan. Not the explosion that took my leg, for once, but the quiet, moments between missions, sitting with my unit under desert stars so bright they seemed artificial, the surprising cold of nighttime, the way sound carried across empty distances. In the dream, I was trying to radio home, but no one would answer. The communication device worked. I could hear breathing on the other end, but no words came back, no matter how desperately I called. I woke at dawn, drenched in sweat, the phantom pain in my missing limb throbbing in time with my heartbeat. Sara slept peacefully beside me, one hand outstretched as if reaching for me even in sleep. Careful not to wake her, I slipped out of bed and into the bathroom. The mirror showed me a face I barely recognized, pale, hollow-eyed, jaw clenched so tight it ached. I looked like I had in those early days after the explosion, when pain and fear and anger had been my constant companions. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to center myself with the breathing exercises my physical therapist had taught me. 4 counts in, hold for 7, 8 counts out. Repeat until the world stops spinning. By the time Sara woke, I had showered, attached my prosthetic, and was sitting by the window with my laptop open, staring at a blank email to my company's HR department. I needed to request time off, but couldn't find the words to explain why. "Morning," Sara mumbled, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I replied, not mentioning the nightmare. She worried enough about my PTSD without me adding fuel. "I'm trying to figure out what to say to work. Family emergency seems both accurate and wildly insufficient." Sara wrapped her robe tighter and came to look over my shoulder. "How about personal emergency requiring immediate attention? Corporate speak for my life is imploding, but I'll be professional about it." I typed it out, added a request for 3 days leave, and hit send before I could overthink it. "Done," she kissed the top of my head. "What's the plan for today?" I closed the laptop and turned to face her. "I need to go to the house and get my things. They'll be at church until noon, so that gives me a window." I hesitated, then added, "And I need to decide what I'm doing about the mortgage before I face them again." Sara nodded, understanding the weight of this decision. "Want my opinion?" "Always," I said truthfully. She sat on the edge of the bed, gathering her thoughts. Sara never spoke without consideration, one of many qualities that made her an excellent counselor. "I think," she said carefully, "that you need to separate these issues. Getting your belongings and confronting your parents about their treatment of you is one thing. The mortgage is another. How can I separate them? They're all tangled together. Now. Because one is about your identity, your dignity, your emotional well-being. The other is just business." She leaned forward, elbows on knees. "If you use the mortgage as a weapon, even if they deserve it, you're mixing money and emotional pain in a way that might haunt you later." I knew she was right, but that didn't make the answer any clearer. So what do I do? Just keep paying their mortgage secretly while they think I'm dead to them? Sell the loan back to a bank and wash my hands of it? Or tell them the truth and watch their faces when they realize their dead daughter holds the keys to their home? Sara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took my hands in hers, running her thumb over the small scar on my right wrist, a souvenir from basic training. "I can't tell you what to do," she finally said, "but I can tell you this. Whatever choice you make needs to be one you can live with 5 years from now, not just tomorrow." I nodded, the weight of her words settling deep. I'd made life and death decisions in combat with less deliberation than this required. Because this wasn't about survival, it was about the person I wanted to be. We arrived at my parents' house at 9:30 a.m., parking a block away just in case they'd skipped church. The white colonial looked exactly as it had yesterday, as if the foundation of my life hadn't cracked wide open inside its walls. The American flag still hung by the door, the irony not lost on me that the country I'd nearly died for was the same one whose values my parents used to reject me. "Want me to come in?" Sara asked, squeezing my hand across the center console. I shook my head. "Better not. If they come home early..." I didn't need to finish the thought. We both knew another confrontation with Sara present would only escalate things. "I'll wait here," she promised. "Call if you need anything." The spare key was still hidden in the fake rock by the hydrangeas. Some things never changed, even when everything else did. I let myself in quietly, like a thief in my childhood home. The house smelled of coffee and my mother's cinnamon bread, Sunday traditions as consistent as their church-going. In the entryway hung family photos, a visual timeline of our lives. I paused, studying them with new eyes. There I was at 5, gap-toothed and beaming in pigtails. At 12, awkward in braces and a school uniform. At 18, stiff and uncomfortable in my high school graduation gown, already knowing I was disappointing them with my choice to enlist. The photos stopped there. No pictures of me in uniform, no graduation from basic training, no Purple Heart ceremony, nothing from the last 12 years of my life. Jason's timeline continued: college graduation, fishing trips with Dad, church mission projects. The son whose existence they celebrated while mine they curated to fit their narrative. I moved through, the house like a ghost, noting the Bible verses framed on walls, the worn family prayer book on the coffee table, the cross-stitched blessing over the dining room table where they'd disowned me just hours before. My old room was at the top of the stairs, preserved like a museum to a daughter who no longer existed. Pink walls I'd begged to repaint as a teenager. A bookshelf with the approved Christian fiction of my youth, alongside hidden volumes of military history and dog-eared science magazines. A twin bed with the same floral comforter I'd slept under the night before I shipped out. I hadn't stayed in this room for years, preferring hotels when I visited. Too many ghosts lingered here, of the girl trying desperately to be what her parents wanted, of the woman who knew she never could be. I pulled out the duffel bag I'd brought and began filling it methodically. Clothes I'd left behind, photo albums from before the family fracture, the wooden jewelry box my grandfather had carved for my 16th birthday, containing my grandmother's cameo and my first pair of dog tags. In the back of my closet, hidden, behind winter boots, I found a shoebox labeled Rachel's Treasures in my teenage handwriting. Inside were the mementos I'd deemed most precious. My acceptance letter to West Point, which I'd declined for financial reasons when my parents refused to sign the parent statement. Medals from high school track meets, a smooth river stone Jason had given me when I left for basic training. So you remember where home is. That stone had traveled with me to Afghanistan and back. I'd held it during the worst nights of pain after losing my leg, rubbing it smooth between my fingers like a worry stone or prayer bead. Home. What a complicated concept that had become. I tucked the box into my duffel alongside my clothes and photo albums. In the bathroom, I collected my old toiletries and the waterproof bag for my prosthetic. Things I hadn't needed at the hotel but would need at Sara's. As I worked, my mind circled back to the mortgage question. The papers sat heavy in my jacket pocket, a tangible reminder of the power I held, a power I'd never wanted to use. I found myself in my father's study, standing before his desk with its meticulous organization and leather-bound Bible. This was where he paid the bills, where he'd likely opened the foreclosure notices from the bank before they mysteriously stopped coming, where he'd probably prayed for financial deliverance, never imagining it would come through the daughter he'd rejected. On impulse, I opened the top drawer where he kept important documents. Inside was a folder labeled Mortgage, containing the payment book and correspondence from before I'd purchased the loan. The last notice showed they were 4 months behind, with foreclosure proceedings about to begin. The property assessment valued the house at nearly $400,000, far more than the $220,000 remaining on the loan that I now held. They could sell, I realized. Even in foreclosure, they'd walk away with enough to start over. My intervention hadn't saved them from homelessness, just from losing their pride and the home they'd raised their children in, the home they'd just evicted me from for the second time. A car door slammed outside, jolting me from my thoughts. I hurried to the window and saw my parents' Buick in the driveway. Church had ended early. I grabbed my duffel bag and ducked into the hallway, planning to slip out the back door. But I was too late. The front door opened and my mother's voice floated up the stairs. Completely inappropriate for Pastor Mike to suggest we seek understanding. As if this is something we could ever understand or accept. The Bible is quite clear. She stopped abruptly, and I knew she'd spotted my car down the street. My father's heavier footsteps followed her into the house. "Is that Rachel's car?" His voice was tight with displeasure. Frozen at the top of the stairs, I weighed my options. I could try to sneak out, avoiding another confrontation, or I could face them, get it over with. Years of military training had taught me that sometimes advancing into the fight was safer than retreating. I took a deep breath and stepped into view at the top of the stairs, duffel bag over my shoulder, prosthetic leg clearly visible below my shorts. I hadn't bothered to hide it, as I often did in jeans when visiting them. "I came for my things," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I was hoping to be gone before you got back." My mother's hand flew to her throat, her eyes darting away from my artificial limb as they always did. My father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "You have no right to be here," my mother finally managed, her voice high and strained. "This is our home, and we made ourselves clear last night." "Crystal clear," I agreed, descending the stairs slowly, my uneven gait emphasized by the weight of the duffel. "But I do have a right to my personal belongings." When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I stood tall, looking my father directly in the eyes. He was shorter than I remembered, or perhaps I'd grown stronger. "I'll be out of your way in a minute," I said. "But there's something we need to discuss first." My father crossed his arms, his pastorate church smile nowhere to be seen. "We have nothing to discuss with you." I reached into my pocket and withdrew the mortgage documents, holding them up so both my parents could see the bank's logo. "Actually, we do. About the house." My mother's expression shifted from righteous anger to confusion. "What about the house? That's none of your business." "That's where you're wrong," I said quietly, unfolding the papers. "As of yesterday morning, I own your mortgage." The color drained from my father's face as understanding dawned. He reached for the papers with a shaking hand, and I let him take them. My mother peered over his shoulder, her brow furrowed. "This is some kind of trick," my father said. But his voice lacked conviction as he scanned the legal language. "No trick, Dad. When Jason mentioned you were facing foreclosure, I bought the loan from the bank. I was going to make the payments quietly, let you think the bank had offered some kind of relief program." I adjusted the duffel on my shoulder. "I never planned to tell you." "Then why are you telling us now?" my mother asked, genuine fear in her eyes. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. Why indeed? I studied my parents' faces, the fear, the confusion, the dawning realization of their vulnerability. For a moment, I savored it. This reversal of power felt like justice after years of conditional love. "I'm telling you now because you should know who really owns this house," I said evenly. "Who you're really indebted to." My father's face hardened, pride overtaking fear. "If this is some kind of revenge—" "Revenge?" I interrupted, a bitter laugh escaping. "If I wanted revenge, I'd have started eviction proceedings this morning. The paperwork is already prepared." This was a bluff, but they didn't need to know that. My mother sank onto the bottom stair, clutching the banister like it might save her from drowning. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "This is our home." The tremor in her voice pulled at something deep inside me, some stubborn thread of love that remained despite everything. I thought of Sara's words, "Make a choice you can live with 5 years from now." "I came to get my things and tell you about the mortgage," I said, deliberately gentling my tone. "What happens next is up to you." My father stiffened. "What does that mean? What do you want from us?" It was a good question. What did I want? Not groveling. Not fake acceptance that would evaporate once the financial threat was gone. Maybe just acknowledgement. Recognition of the damage they'd done. "I want you to understand what you've thrown away," I said quietly. "Not just your daughter, but someone who loves you enough to try saving your home even when you've made it clear I'm not welcome in it. Someone who served this country and nearly died doing it. Someone who finally found happiness after years of hiding and pain." My mother wouldn't look at me, her gaze fixed on her clasped hands. My father stood rigid, the mortgage papers crumpled in his fist. "The Bible says to honor thy father and mother," he said stiffly. "Is this how you honor us? By holding our home hostage?" The familiar scripture hit its mark, aimed with precision by a man who'd weaponized faith my entire life. But I wasn't the same person who had once crumbled under such spiritual manipulation. "The Bible also says a lot about loving your children, Dad. About not provoking them to anger. About acceptance and forgiveness and casting the first stone." I shifted my weight, the prosthetic pinching slightly. "I've honored you both all my life. Kept my truths hidden to spare your comfort. Accepted your dismissal of my service and my sacrifice. Pretended Sara was just my roommate last Christmas when you clearly knew better." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "But honor doesn't mean letting you disown me without consequence. It doesn't mean pretending your rejection doesn't cut deeper than any physical wound I got in combat." My mother's shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. My father stood over her, one hand on her shoulder, his expression unreadable. "What are your terms?" he finally asked. "Businessman to the core even in emotional crisis?" "My terms," I repeated slowly, testing the phrase. "I'm not here to negotiate, Dad. I'm here to make something clear. I will continue making the mortgage payments as planned. This house is safe. But not because you deserve it, because I choose to be better than the example you've set." My father's eyebrows rose in surprise. Whatever he'd expected, financial demands, emotional blackmail, immediate eviction, it wasn't this. "You're just paying our mortgage? After what happened?" "Yes." "Why?" The simple question hung between us, deceptively complex. "Because I meant my vows when I enlisted," I said after a moment, "to protect and defend. Even when it's hard. Even when it hurts. And because walking away entirely would mean being as small as you were last night." My mother looked up then, her mascara streaked down her cheeks. "You don't understand, Rachel. We're trying to save you. You're trying to force me to be someone I'm not," I cut in gently. "Someone who never existed except in your imagination. The straight daughter who'd marry a nice church boy and give you grandchildren and never challenge your worldview. That person is a ghost." I gestured to myself, short hair, prosthetic leg, dog tags still hanging around my neck after all these years. "This is who I am. A veteran. A woman who loves another woman. Someone who's seen the worst humanity has to offer and still chooses to believe in the best. Take it or leave it, but stop pretending you can pray me into someone else." A heavy silence filled the entryway. Through the front windows, I could see Sara in the car, watching anxiously. The sight of her gave me strength to finish what I'd started. "I'm going to leave now. I've got what I came for." I patted the duffel bag. "You'll receive mortgage statements each month showing the payments I'm making. What you do with that information is up to you. I moved toward the door, but my father's voice stopped me. And what about your lifestyle choice? Your relationship? He couldn't bring himself to say Sara's name or call her my fiancée. I turned back, hand on the doorknob. Not negotiable, not a choice, not something you get a vote on. Sara and I are getting married in October. Jason will be giving me away. I met his gaze steadily. You're both invited, but only if you can be truly present. Not to judge or tolerate, but to celebrate. That's not possible, my father said, voice tight. You know our beliefs. I know your interpretation of your beliefs, I corrected. I also know there are plenty of Christians who found ways to honor their faith while still loving their LGBTQ children fully. It's a choice, Dad. Just not the one you think it is. My mother rose shakily from the stairs, wiping her tears. Rachel, please, we just need time to pray about this, to take all the time you need, I said, softening despite myself at her distress. I've waited 30 years for you to see me clearly. I can wait a little longer. With that, I opened the door and stepped into the morning sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I'd wielded power over them, but because I'd chosen not to. The mortgage papers they now held weren't a threat but a lifeline, one I'd extended despite their rejection. The choice of what to do with it was theirs. Sara straightened in the driver's seat as I approached, her face a question. I slid into the passenger side, placing my duffel in the back seat. Are you okay? She asked, scanning my face for signs of distress. I saw them come home and was about to come in after you. I took her hand and brought it to my lips. I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. What happened? Did you tell them about the mortgage? I nodded, watching as my parents appeared in the doorway, my father still clutching the papers, my mother leaning against him. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the truth between us. I told them I'm keeping the payments up, that the house is safe. Sara's eyebrows shot up. Really? Just like that? Just like that, I confirmed. Turns out revenge isn't really my style after all. She squeezed my hand, pride evident in her smile. That's why I'm marrying you, Lieutenant. Heart like a lion, even when it's been broken. As we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the house or my parents standing in its doorway. What happened next was up to them. I'd done what I could, preserved their home while refusing to shrink myself any smaller to fit inside it. Jason called as we reached the highway, his voice tense. Mom just texted me something about you owning their mortgage? What the hell is going on? I laughed, surprising myself with how genuine it felt. It's a long story, Jace. How about I tell you over dinner tonight? Sara's cooking her famous lasagna. Ham? Sara whispered beside me, eyebrows raised. You are now, I whispered back, winking. I'm confused as hell, but lasagna sounds good, Jason said. I'll bring beer. Mike's place at 7? Actually, we're at Sara's now. I'm officially moved out of the hotel. And out of my parents' house, I didn't add. We all knew what this move represented, not just a change of address, but a redrawing of family lines. After hanging up, I rolled down the window, letting the spring air rush over my face. Sara drove with one hand on the wheel, the other intertwined with mine between us. Ahead lay Richmond, a new home, a wedding to plan, a future unburdened by the need for approval I'd never receive. No regrets? Sara asked, glancing over at me. I considered the question, weighing the ache of my parents' rejection against the freedom of finally truly being seen. If not by them, then by Sara, by Jason, by myself. No regrets, I answered honestly. Just hope. Hope? That someday they'll realize what they've lost, that the door I left open won't stay open forever, that love, real love, doesn't come with conditions. Sara nodded, understanding as she always did. And if they don't? I watched the familiar landscape of my hometown recede in the side mirror, growing smaller with each mile. Then we build our own family, I said simply. One that knows how to love without reservation. 3 months passed in a blur of wedding, planning, work commitments, and settling into my new life with Sara. We found a rhythm together in her, now our apartment in Richmond, just 20 minutes from my cybersecurity job, and 30 from her counseling practice. Each morning, I woke beside her feeling a sense of rightness that had eluded me my entire life. Jason visited often, bringing takeout and wedding magazines, enthusiastically throwing himself into the role of man of honor with a dedication that made up for our parents' absence. He'd moved in with his friend Mike temporarily, but was already looking at apartments closer to us. "Found a place in Shockoe Bottom," he announced one Friday evening as we sat on Sara's balcony, watching fireflies rise from the grass below. 2-bedroom, decent rent, lease starts next month. "That's great," I said, genuinely pleased. "But what about your job back home? That's an hour commute." He sipped his beer, avoiding my eyes. "I, actually gave notice last week. Got an offer from a firm here in Richmond. Better pay, better benefits." Sara and I exchanged glances. "Jace," I said carefully, "you didn't have to uproot your entire life just because—" "It's not just because of what happened," he interrupted. "I've been wanting to make a change for a while. You know how Dad's always hovering over me at the company, treating me like I'm still 12. This is a fresh start," he shrugged, attempting casualness. "Besides, someone needs to be around to make sure you don't mess up this wedding." I let it go, recognizing the deflection but appreciating the sentiment behind it. Jason was choosing me, choosing us in a way our parents couldn't or wouldn't. The mortgage statements arrived punctually each month, addressed to me but delivered to my parents' house as arranged with the bank. I made the payments automatically. From my account, a quiet fulfillment of the promise I'd made that day in their entryway. I didn't know if they'd tried to make payments themselves, if they'd torn up the statements, or if they'd recognized the gesture for what it was. Not control, but care. They hadn't contacted me since that day. No calls, no texts, not even when my birthday passed in early July. I told myself I didn't mind, that I'd expected nothing less, but the silence still stung in quiet moments. Sara found me one night staring at my phone, scrolling through old family photos, Christmas mornings, backyard barbecues, moments when we'd at least approximated a normal, loving family. "You could call them, you know," she said gently, sitting beside me on the couch. "You don't have to wait for them to make the first move." I shook my head, locking the screen. "If I call, it lets them believe this is just a phase, something I'll get over, the prodigal daughter returning to the fold." I leaned into her, drawing strength from her presence. The ball is in their court. But as our October wedding date approached, the absence became more pronounced. I had no mother to help choose my dress, no father to walk me down the aisle. Instead, I went shopping with Sara's mother, Carol, who had embraced me instantly as the daughter she'd never had. "You look stunning, sweetheart," Carol said as I tried on a simple ivory suit, tailored to accommodate my prosthetic comfortably. Her eyes welled with tears. "Sara is going to absolutely melt when she sees you." I smiled, turning to examine my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked strong, confident, so different from the perpetually anxious daughter who'd always tried to shape herself into someone her parents could approve of. "Thank you, Carol, for everything." My voice caught. "For accepting us so easily." She stood behind me, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "There's nothing easier than loving someone who makes your child happy." Her hand squeezed my shoulder. "I'm sorry your parents don't see that yet." "Yet," I repeated, clinging to the optimism in that small word. The weekend before the wedding, as Sara and I finalized seating arrangements at our dining table, My phone lit up with a text from Jason. "Mom called me, she wants to talk." My heart stuttered. I showed the message to Sara, who put down her pen and gave me her full attention. "What do you think she wants?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Only one way to find out," Sara replied. "But whatever it is, remember you don't owe them anything." I nodded, typing a response to Jason. "What did you tell her?" His reply came quickly. "That I'd pass along the message, but the decision to talk is yours. I didn't mention the wedding." I stared at the phone, conflicted. Part of me yearned for reconciliation, for my mother's presence on what should be the happiest day of my life. Another part remembered the disgust in her eyes when I'd announced my engagement, the painful silence on my birthday, the lifetime of conditional acceptance. "You don't have to decide right now," Sara said, reading my expression. "Give yourself time to think about what you actually want from this conversation." I set the phone down, returning to the seating chart. Let's finish this first, one emotionally loaded task at a time. Later that night, lying awake while Sara slept peacefully beside me, I composed a text to my mother. "Jason said you wanted to talk. I'm listening." I pressed send before I could overthink it, then set the phone on silent. Whatever came next, I wouldn't let it derail the life I was building, the happiness I'd fought so hard to claim. The response came the following morning, appearing on my screen as I sipped coffee on the balcony, watching the city wake up. "Could we meet for coffee?" Just us. The request was simple, but the implications complex. A private conversation meant my father wasn't part of this outreach. It might be easier, just my mother. She'd always been more malleable, less rigid in her judgments. Or it might be a divide and conquer strategy, testing for weakness in my resolve. I showed the text to Sara over breakfast. "What do you think?" She considered carefully before answering, spreading jam on her toast with deliberate focus. "I think you should go, but only if you're prepared for any outcome. She might want to reconcile, or she might want to make one last attempt to save you before the wedding." "How do I prepare for both possibilities?" Sara smiled gently. "By remembering who you are now, not who she wants you to be." I arranged to meet my mother at a neutral location, a coffee shop in Carytown, midway between Richmond and my hometown. Jason offered to come along for moral support, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. The morning of the meeting dawned clear and cool, early autumn painting the trees along the highway in shades of gold and crimson. I dressed carefully in jeans and a simple blouse, my prosthetic visible below my cuffed pants. No more hiding. My mother was already seated when I arrived, a cup of tea steaming untouched before her. She looked older than she had 3 months ago, new lines etched around her mouth and eyes. She'd lost weight, her wedding ring loose on her finger as she fidgeted nervously. She stood when she saw me, awkwardly, as if unsure whether to hug me or shake hands or simply nod. I solved the dilemma by sliding into the seat across from her. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice smaller. Then I remembered. "You said you wanted to talk," I replied evenly. "I'm here." She nodded, eyes darting to my prosthetic briefly before returning to my face. "You look well, healthy." "I am well. Happy, actually." I signaled to the barista for my usual order. They knew me here from weekend visits with Sara. Jason said, "You called him?" "Yes." She twisted her napkin between her fingers. "He's doing well in Richmond. New job, new apartment." "He is. He's thriving." I let the implication hang. "Away from you and Dad, he's thriving." My coffee arrived, giving me something to do with my hands. The silence stretched between us, 30 years of unspoken words crammed into the small space of a cafe table. "Rachel," my mother finally began, "I wanted to apologize. Whatever I'd expected, it wasn't this. Not an immediate apology, not without preamble or qualification. I kept my expression neutral, waiting. The way we handled things that night, the things we said, it was wrong. Her voice trembled slightly. I've been doing a lot of thinking, a lot of praying. And Dad? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Has he been doing a lot? Of thinking and praying too? She looked down. Your father is struggling. His beliefs are deeply ingrained, as you know. So are yours. Yes, she admitted. But I've been meeting with Pastor Mike privately, reading books he recommended, trying to understand more perspectives. I took a sip of my coffee, processing this information. Pastor Mike, the same man my parents had criticized the morning I'd retrieved my things for suggesting they seek understanding. Why now? I asked directly. It's been 3 months of complete silence. My birthday came and went. What changed? Mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Your brother told us you're getting married next weekend. So that was it. The impending wedding had forced their hand. Either reach out now or accept that they'd miss this milestone entirely. I wasn't sure whether to be grateful to Jason or irritated that he'd shared this information without telling me. We are, I confirmed. Saturday at 4 at the Botanic Gardens. Small ceremony, just 50 guests. It sounds lovely, she said softly. It will be. Another silence fell, heavier than the last. I could feel her gathering courage for whatever came next. Rachel, I'd like to come. The words rushed out, almost desperate. To your wedding, if you'll have me. I set my cup down carefully, studying my mother's face. There was genuine emotion there, but also fear. Fear of rejection, perhaps, or fear of crossing the invisible line my father had drawn. Just you? I clarified. Not Dad? She swallowed hard. He's not ready. I don't know if he'll ever be. But I am. Or at least, I'm trying to be. She reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. You're my daughter. I don't want to lose you completely. The sincerity in her voice pierced something in me, a wall I'd built to protect myself from further hurt. But still, I hesitated. A wedding day isn't the time for tentative first steps, Mom. It's a celebration, not a test run for acceptance. I know, she whispered. I know that now. I studied my mother across the cafe table, searching for signs of the woman who had once tucked me in at night and bandaged scraped knees. The woman who, despite her rigid beliefs, had taught me perseverance and strength, qualities that had served me well in the military, qualities I'd needed when she and my father had turned those same beliefs against me. If you come, I said, carefully. There are things you need to understand first. She nodded, hands clasped tightly around her teacup. I'm listening. Sara isn't my roommate or friend or any other euphemism. She's going to be my wife. There will be a kiss at the altar. We'll dance together. We'll be openly affectionate. I held her gaze steadily. If any of that makes you uncomfortable, this isn't the right first step. I understand, she said softly. And you can't come representing both of you, making excuses for why Dad isn't there or sending his love when he hasn't offered it. This is your choice, not a family delegation. She flinched slightly but nodded again. That's fair. Most importantly, I continued, this can't be about praying for my salvation or hoping I'll change. It has to be about accepting who I actually, not who you wish I was. To her credit, my mother didn't look away. I'm trying, Rachel. I really am. She hesitated, then added, I've been seeing a therapist, along with the pastoral counseling. She's helping me understand that my difficulty accepting you has more to do with my own fears and upbringing than anything you've done. This surprised me. My mother had always dismissed therapy as something for people who didn't have enough faith. That she'd sought it out suggested a level of commitment I hadn't anticipated. Does Dad know about the therapy? She shook her head. Not everything needs to be shared, I'm learning. Some journeys are personal. I nearly smiled at that. How many times had I kept parts of myself hidden to keep the peace? The irony that she was now doing the same wasn't lost on me. I appreciate that you're making an effort, I said, softening slightly. But a wedding is a milestone event. If you're there, it will be a memory Sara and I carry forever. I need to be certain you're coming to celebrate, not tolerate. I want to celebrate. You? My mother said, emotion making her voice unsteady. Both of you. It may not be perfect. I may make mistakes. But I want to try. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet box. I brought something, a gift, if you'll accept it. She placed the box on the table between us. I recognized it immediately, the antique jewelry box that had belonged to my grandmother, which had always sat on my mother's dresser, off limits to childhood fingers. Open it, she urged. Inside, nestled on faded satin, lay my grandmother's pearl earrings. I'd admired them as a child, fascinated by their soft luster and the tiny diamond chips that topped each pearl. They'd been promised to me someday, a promise apparently forgotten after I enlisted. These were meant for your wedding day, my mother explained. I've kept them all these years, even when… She trailed off, unable to voice the when I thought you'd never have a proper wedding that hung in the air. I touched one earring lightly, memories washing over me. They're beautiful, I said honestly. But why now? What changed? My mother's composure finally broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. I found the mortgage statements, she admitted. All 3 months' worth, paid in. Full. Your father wanted to tear them up, to refuse what he called charity, but I kept them. Proof that even after everything we said and did, you were still taking care of us. So, that was it. The mortgage payments, the quiet, consistent fulfillment of my promise, had spoken louder than any words could have. It wasn't charity, I said, gently. It was family. The way I was raised to understand it anyway. She wiped her tears with a napkin. When I realized what you'd done, continuing to pay even after we'd hurt you so deeply, I couldn't reconcile it with what your father, and I have been telling ourselves, that your lifestyle was about rebellion or confusion or turning away from how we raised you. And now? Now I see it was we who turned away. From the daughter who embodies the values we claimed to teach, sacrifice, compassion, integrity, better than we do ourselves. She pushed the jewelry box closer to me. These are yours. Whether I come to the wedding or not. Whether you ever forgive us or not. I closed the box carefully, but didn't take it. I need to think about this, Mom. About whether having you there would bring peace or tension to our day. I need to talk to Sara. Of course, she said, disappointment clear in her voice but accompanied by understanding. Take whatever time you need. As I stood to leave, she asked one more question. The house, will you keep paying the mortgage? I looked down at her. This woman who had given me life, raised me with love however imperfect, and then rejected who I'd become. Who was now taking tentative steps toward reconciliation, whether from genuine growth or fear of losing her only daughter forever. I'll keep my promise, I assured her. The house is safe. It always was. The week before our wedding passed in a flurry of last-minute details and arrivals of out-of-town guests. Sara's family came from Minnesota, claiming an entire floor of a nearby hotel and bringing Midwestern warmth to every pre-wedding gathering. My Army friends flew in from across the country, their presence a testament to bonds formed in desert dust and shared danger. Through it all, I carried the weight of my mother's request, the velvet box of pearl earrings now sitting on our dresser at home. I'd told Sara everything, of course, laying out my conflicted feelings as we lay in bed the night after the coffee shop meeting. "What do you want to do?" she'd asked, running her fingers through my hair. "I don't know," I'd answered honestly. Part of me wants her there, wants some piece of my original family to witness this new one we're creating. Another part feels like it's too soon, that her presence might cast a shadow over a day that should be only joy. Sara had considered this carefully. "Would you regret it more if she came and it was awkward? Or if she didn't come and you looked back wondering what might have been?" It was the right question, one I'd been circling without directly confronting. What would future Rachel wish present Rachel had done? I'd found my answer 3 days before the wedding, during our final venue walkthrough. We stood in the garden where we'd say our vows, autumn flowers blooming around us, the setting sun painting everything in gold. "I want to invite her," I said, suddenly, turning to Sara. "My mother. I want her to come." Sara squeezed my hand. "Are you sure?" "No," I admitted. "But I'm sure I'd regret it if I didn't at least offer the chance." "She's trying, Sara. It's imperfect and late and complicated, but she's trying." That night, I'd called my mother and extended the formal invitation. Her tearful acceptance confirmed I'd made the right choice, not for her, but for me. The morning of our wedding dawned clear and crisp, perfect October weather blessing the day. Jason arrived early at our apartment, carrying coffee and his suit in a garment bag. "Ready for the big day, sis?" he asked, kissing my cheek. "More than ready," I assured him, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Sara stayed at Carol's last night. Tradition and all that. Mom texted me," he said casually, hanging his suit in our bedroom closet. "She's nervous about today." I nodded, unsurprised. "Me too, honestly. Not about marrying Sara. That's the one thing I'm completely certain about. But having Mom there? Knowing Dad refused to come." I trailed off, the familiar ache of his absence rising despite my best efforts. Jason sat beside me on the couch. "You did something brave, inviting her. Opening the door again after they slammed it in your face." "I'm not sure if it's bravery or foolishness," I said, attempting a smile. But it felt right. The hours flew by, hair and makeup, photographers. Arriving, Sarah's best friend Sophie bringing mimosas and breakfast. Before I knew it, I was dressed in my ivory suit, my hair styled, my grandmother's pearl earrings cool against my neck. The prosthetic leg I normally covered was visible below my tailored pants, a deliberate choice to enter marriage fully as myself, no parts hidden. "You look incredible," Jason said, his eyes suspiciously bright as he straightened his tie. Sarah's not going to know what hit her. We arrived at the Botanic Gardens an hour before the ceremony. Through the venue's windows, I could see guests beginning to arrive, finding their seats in the garden where rows of white chairs faced an archway draped with autumn flowers and eucalyptus. My heart caught when I saw her, my mother, arriving alone, wearing a soft blue dress I'd never seen before. She looked uncertain as an usher guided her to her seat in the front row, reserved for immediate family. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she clutched her small purse like a lifeline. "She came," I whispered, more to myself than to Jason. "Did you think she wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure," I admitted. "I thought she might lose her nerve, or Dad might forbid it." Jason's expression darkened slightly. He tried, called her a traitor to their marriage for coming without him. "How do you know that?" "She told me," he said simply, "when she called to ask what she should wear. Said she was coming anyway, regardless of what it cost her at home." This revelation landed like a stone in still water, ripples of understanding spreading outward. My mother hadn't just agreed to attend. She'd defied my father to be here, something I'd never known her to do in 30 years of marriage. When the music began and Jason offered his arm to walk me down the aisle, I felt a strange sense of completion. Not because my family was whole. It wasn't, might never be. But because the pieces that remained had chosen to be there, had fought to be there. My mother stood as we passed, tears streaming unchecked down her face. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment I saw something I'd been seeking my entire life. Pure, unqualified pride. Sara waited at the altar, radiant in her cream dress, looking at me like I was something miraculous. As Jason placed my hand in hers, whispering, "Take care of her," with a grin, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. Whatever came after, whether healing or continued estrangement with my father, whether my mother's growth continued or faltered, this moment was perfect in its imperfection. A family fractured but not destroyed, rebuilding itself in new configurations around the unbreakable center of love that remained. As we spoke our vows beneath the October sky, I glanced once at my mother in the front row. She was watching us, with an expression I'd never seen before, one free from judgment or fear, simply present and open to the joy before her. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning, and beginnings, I'd learned, were worth celebrating. 1 year after our wedding, Sara and I invited a small group to our new home, a charming craftsman-style bungalow we'd purchased just outside Richmond. The autumn evening mirrored our wedding day, crisp air carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke as guests arrived bearing dishes for our first anniversary dinner. Jason came early to help set up, bringing his new girlfriend Katie, who taught elementary school and looked at my brother like he'd invented sunshine. Sara's parents arrived with homemade bread and Minnesota wild rice soup, embracing me as warmly as they had their own daughter. Army friends Alex and Darius drove down from D.C., carrying expensive whiskey and lousy jokes. Sara's best friend, Sophie, brought her wife and their new baby, a tiny bundle who slept peacefully amid the growing noise of conversation and laughter. The last to arrive was my mother, alone again, but somehow standing taller than she had at the wedding. She carried a wrapped package and a bouquet of late-blooming dahlias from her garden. "These are beautiful, Mom," I said, taking the flowers and kissing her cheek. The gesture still felt new, tentative, but no longer awkward. "They're the ones you used to love as a child," she replied, following me into the kitchen where Sara was arranging appetizers. "You'd collect the petals and press them in your books." I caught Sara's eye across the counter, sharing a silent moment of acknowledgement. This was growth, my mother remembering who I actually was, not who she'd wanted me to be. The past year had been one of careful reconstruction between us. Monthly coffee meetings that gradually evolved into dinner invitations, phone calls that moved beyond surface pleasantries into meaningful conversation. She'd attended a PFLAG meeting at Pastor Mike's suggestion, coming away shaken but determined to continue learning. My father remained absent, stubbornly entrenched in his position. I still made the mortgage payments each month, a promise kept despite his rejection. Occasionally, my mother would mention him, small details about his health or work, but we both understood the unspoken boundary. He had made his choice. As we gathered around our dining table, mismatched chairs accommodating more guests than we'd planned for, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was the family we'd built, chosen, and biological, bound by love rather than obligation. Jason stood to offer a toast, raising his glass with characteristic enthusiasm. "To Rachel and Sara on their first anniversary. You two have taught me more about courage and real love than anyone else in my life." He glanced briefly at our mother, who nodded slightly. "May you have decades more of building this beautiful life together." "Hear, hear," echoed around the table as glasses clinked. Later, as dessert was being served, Sara's famous apple crumble with vanilla ice cream, my mother touched my arm gently. "Could we talk privately for a moment?" she asked. We stepped onto the back porch, where string lights cast a warm glow over the small garden we'd planted in spring. The night air had cooled considerably, and I wrapped my cardigan tighter around myself. "Is everything okay?" I asked, sensing her nervousness. More than okay, she said, smiling slightly. I wanted to give you something without an audience. She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, holding it out to me. It's not much, but it's a start. Inside was a check, substantial enough to make my eyes widen, and a handwritten note. The check was made out to Sara and me, with anniversary gift written in the memo line. The note simply read, "For your future together. With love and pride. Mom? Mom, this is—" I trailed off, stunned by the amount. It's too much. She shook her head firmly. It's part of my inheritance from your grandmother. I've been saving it for years, waiting for the right moment. Her voice softened. She would have loved Sara, you know. She always had more room in her heart than the rest of us. I blinked back, sudden tears, remembering my grandmother's quiet kindness, how she'd been the only one who hadn't blinked when I'd announced my intention to enlist. Thank you, I managed, not just for this, but for being here, for trying. My mother's eyes glistened in the dim light. There's something else you should know. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Your father and I are separating. The news hit me like a physical blow. What? Since when? Since I stopped pretending, she said simply. After your wedding, I couldn't go back to the way things were. Watching you and Sara together, so honest and brave, it changed something in me. She looked out over the garden, her profile strong against the darkness. I realized I'd been living half a life, always deferring, always afraid. Mom, I never wanted to come between you and Dad. You didn't, she assured me. This was a long time coming. Your situation just helped me see things clearly. She turned back to me, determination in her eyes. I'm getting an apartment in town next month. Nothing fancy, just a fresh start. I leaned against the porch railing, processing this shift in the family landscape. What about the house? The mortgage? That's part of what I wanted to discuss. She straightened her shoulders. I'd like to sell it, split the proceeds with your father as part of the separation agreement. But of course, the mortgage is in your name. The irony wasn't lost on me. The mortgage that had once represented my secret support of my parents now stood as the final tie between us, one that needed severing for my mother's freedom. I'll sign whatever you need, I told her. The house was never about control for me. I know that now, she said softly. I think I always knew, but I couldn't admit it. From inside came the sound of laughter, Sara's voice rising above the others, recounting some story that had everyone in stitches. The life we'd built, vibrant and real, continued just beyond the glass doors. We should get back inside, I suggested, tucking the envelope into my pocket. They'll wonder where we've gone. My mother nodded, but before I could open the door, she stopped me with a gentle hand on my arm. Rachel, I want you to know, I'm proud of you, not despite who you are, but because of it. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. Words I'd waited a lifetime to hear, spoken simply on an autumn night, 1 year into the marriage she'd once refused to acknowledge. Better late than never, I said, smiling through tears as I pulled her into a hug. As we rejoined the party, Sara caught my eye, across the room, raising an eyebrow in silent question. I nodded slightly, letting her know all was well. More than well. Another step forward on the long road of healing. The mortgage papers that had once represented my secret power now symbolized something else entirely. The final tether to a past ready to be released. Not through eviction or revenge, but through mutual understanding and the quiet dignity of moving forward. 5 years passed with the speed that only contentment can bring. Sara's counseling practice expanded into a group facility supporting veterans and their families. I was promoted to cybersecurity director at my firm, managing a team of analysts who respected my military background and technical expertise. We welcomed a daughter through adoption, Ellie, now 3 years old, with curious eyes and a laugh that could melt granite. My mother flourished in her independence, finding community through her church's progressive outreach programs and rediscovering passions long set aside during her marriage. She rented a small townhouse near us in Richmond, becoming a regular fixture in our lives and an adoring grandmother to Ellie, who called her Mimi and demanded stories only she could tell. We rarely discussed my father. The divorce had been finalized 4 years ago. The family home sold as planned. He'd moved to Florida with a woman from his church, someone my mother described with careful neutrality as more aligned with his worldview. He sent Christmas and birthday cards to Jason but never to me or Ellie, maintaining his position that our family was not one he could recognize. Until today. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning as I reviewed security protocols with my team. The subject line was stark in its simplicity. From your father. I stared at it through 3 meetings and a conference call, unable to focus on anything else but equally unable to click open whatever message waited inside. When the workday finally ended, I sat alone in my office, finger hovering over the trackpad. You can always delete it unread, I told myself. You owe him nothing. But curiosity and that stubborn thread of attachment won out. I clicked. Rachel, I hope this message finds you well. It has been brought to my attention that I have a granddaughter. Your brother sent photos last Christmas, though I suspect without your knowledge or permission. I have been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis is not favorable. Such news has a way of clarifying one's thoughts and priorities. I would like to meet my granddaughter, if you are amenable. I understand if you refuse. Dad. No platitudes, no apologies, just the stark reality of mortality and a request I never expected to receive. I forwarded the email to Sara with a single question mark, then called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Did you know? I asked without preamble. About your father's cancer? Yes, she admitted. Jason told me last week. I wasn't sure if you'd want to know. He wants to meet Ellie. A pause, then. Are you considering it? I don't know, I answered honestly. What would you do? My mother sighed softly. 5 years ago, I would have told you to forgive him because that's what good Christians do. But I've learned forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. It doesn't require giving someone access to your child. She paused. That said, people do change when confronted with their mortality. Sometimes. I thanked her for her honesty and hung up, no closer to a decision. By the time I arrived home, Sara had read the email and was waiting with dinner already prepared, and Ellie already bathed and in pajamas, creating space for the conversation she knew we needed to have. What are you thinking? She asked after. Ellie was asleep, both of us curled on opposite ends of the couch, wine glasses in hand. I'm thinking about the day my parents disowned me, I said slowly. How absolute it felt. How he said he had no daughter. And now he wants access to my daughter, without so much as an acknowledgement of that pain, let alone an apology. Sara nodded, giving me space to process aloud. But I'm also thinking about what it means to die with unresolved relationships. I took a sip of wine, memories surfacing of battlefield deaths, of futures erased in seconds. When Martinez was killed, in Afghanistan, his biggest regret was a fight with his brother they'd never resolved. He told me that once, on watch, said it kept him up at night. This isn't just about your father, though, Sara pointed out gently. It's about Ellie, too. What message does it send her if we allow someone who rejected her mother into her life? It was the right question, the heart of the matter. What example would we set for our daughter? That family relationships could be discarded and reclaimed at will? That bigotry had no consequences as long as blood ties existed? I need time to think, I said finally. And I need to talk to Jason. He's been maintaining contact all these years. He might have insights I don't. Jason agreed to meet for lunch the following day at a Vietnamese place near my office. He arrived looking more mature than his 32 years, the responsibilities of his growing architectural firm evident in the subtle lines around his eyes. We ordered before diving into the subject at hand. "You knew Dad has cancer," I stated, not a question. He nodded, breaking apart his chopsticks. "Found out about 3 weeks ago when I called him about some old family documents I needed. He mentioned it casually like he was talking about the weather. And you sent him pictures of Ellie." Jason had the grace to look contrite. "Last Christmas, I don't know what I thought. That seeing her might soften him, maybe. That she deserves to know all her family." He met my eyes directly. "I should have asked you first. I'm sorry." I waved away the apology, more interested in his assessment than his regrets. "You've maintained a relationship with him all these years. Has he changed at all? Evolved in his thinking?" My brother considered this carefully, stirring his foe. "Not fundamentally, no. He still believes what he believes. But he's mellowed somewhat with age and distance. Less righteousness, more resignation." He looked up. "The cancer has scared him, Rach. Not just of dying, but of what comes after. I think he's taking inventory of his life. And I'm an outstanding debt," I said, the bitterness surprising me with its intensity. After all this time, the wound still ached when pressed. "Your unfinished business," Jason corrected gently. "A relationship he knows he damaged beyond repair, but maybe hopes to leave slightly less broken before he's gone." I pushed rice noodles around my bowl. Appetite diminished. He didn't apologize in his email, didn't even acknowledge what he did. I know. That's Dad. Pride before everything. Jason reached across the table, squeezing my hand briefly. "But asking to meet Ellie? That's as close to extending an olive branch as he knows how to get." "What would you do?" I asked, the same question I'd posed to my mother. Jason smiled sadly. "I'd protect my daughter first, my heart second, and consider his request third, in that order." When I returned home that evening, Sara and I sat on our back porch after Ellie's bedtime, the string lights casting the same warm glow they had years before when my mother had announced her separation. "I've been thinking all day," Sara said, her legs draped across my lap, "about what I would want if I were in your father's position." "And?" "A chance," she said simply. "Not forgiveness necessarily, not even understanding. Just a chance to see a piece of the future I won't be part of." I nodded, my decision crystallizing in the quiet evening air. "I'll meet with him first, alone, before he meets Ellie, if he meets her at all. I need to know if this is really about connection or just easing his conscience." Sara squeezed my hand. "That seems fair, to all of you." I composed a response to my father that night, setting firm boundaries around a potential meeting. Whatever came next would be on my terms, not his. A daughter making her own choices, not seeking approval, but offering a measured grace that might, in its own way, finally set us both free. The cancer treatment center where my father received chemotherapy was a modern building of glass and steel, designed to feel less clinical with its indoor gardens and natural light. I found him in the infusion suite, a private room with large windows overlooking a courtyard where autumn leaves spiraled down from nearly bare branches. He looked smaller than I remembered. Cancer and chemotherapy had hollowed his once commanding frame, leaving his clothes hanging loose on diminished shoulders. His trademark dark hair, the same shade as mine, had thinned to wisps of gray. When he saw me in the doorway, something flickered across his face too quickly to name. "Rachel," he said, his voice raspier but still carrying that note of authority I'd grown up fearing and respecting in equal measure. "You came." "I said I would," I replied, taking the visitor's chair beside his recliner, where clear fluid dripped steadily through an IV line into his arm. An awkward silence stretched between us, 5 years wide and decades deep. How is the treatment going? I finally asked, defaulting to politeness in the absence of knowing what else to say. It buys time, not cures, he answered matter-of-factly. 3 to 6 months, they say, if I'm lucky. I nodded, recognizing the blunt assessment as characteristic of the man who'd taught me to face hard truths without flinching, a lesson that had served me well in combat, but failed him when confronted with truths about his own daughter. Your mother looks well, he said, surprising me. In the pictures Jason shows me, she seems happy. She is happy, I confirmed. She found herself again. He absorbed this with a slight nod, gaze drifting to the window. And you? Are you happy, Rachel? The question seemed so simple, yet held the weight of everything that had fractured between us. I considered deflecting, protecting the life I'd built from his judgment, but I hadn't come here to hide. Yes, I said firmly. I have a fulfilling career, a marriage based on mutual respect and love, a beautiful daughter, good friends. I'm very happy. My father was silent for a long moment, fingers tracing the edge of the blanket across his lap. I'm glad, he finally said, voice barely audible. You deserve that. Those 4 words, so unexpected, so unprecedented, left me momentarily speechless. In all our years, I couldn't recall my father ever acknowledging I deserved happiness on my own terms. I didn't ask you here for forgiveness, he continued, meeting my eyes directly. I know some damage can't be undone, but I wanted to see you, once more, and tell you I was wrong. Not about everything. He qualified, the old stubborn pride, still evident, but about thinking I could dictate who you should be. It wasn't a complete apology. It wasn't a full retraction of the harmful beliefs he'd wielded like weapons. But coming from a man who had never admitted error in his life, it was seismic. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. It matters, even now. He nodded once, seemingly relieved to have crossed that threshold. Then, with visible effort, Will, you tell me about her? Your daughter? I hesitated only briefly before reaching for my phone. Her name is Ellie, I said, pulling up a recent photo. She's 3 going on 30, according to Sara's mom. My father died 3 months later, on a clear winter morning while birds gathered at the feeder outside his hospice window. I'd brought Ellie to meet him twice during those final months. Brief, carefully supervised visits where she shyly showed him her drawings, and he awkwardly offered her butterscotch candies from his bedside table. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embraces or complete healing of old wounds, just small moments of connection, fragile bridges built across a chasm too wide to fully cross in the time remaining. At his funeral, I stood between my mother and Jason, Ellie's hand warm in mine, Sara steady at my side. I felt no performative grief, just a complex peace. The complicated truth was that my father had loved me imperfectly, hurt me deeply, and left without fully making amends. Yet in those final months, he'd found the courage to acknowledge me, all of me, which was more than I'd ever expected. Later, sorting through his belongings, I found a small box addressed to Ellie. Inside lay my grandfather's pocket watch, and a note in shaky handwriting. For Ellie. May you always know who you are. The mortgage papers that once represented my power over my parents now rest in a folder marked Resolved, tucked away with other artifacts of a journey completed. The house that witnessed both my rejection and my strength has new owners building their own stories within its walls. What remains isn't the pain of disownment or the satisfaction of potential revenge never taken. It's the family we've created through choice and love, the one my parents taught me to value, even if they couldn't always demonstrate it themselves. If you enjoyed this story of family, forgiveness, and finding your own path, subscribe to my channel for more authentic narratives that explore the complex dynamics of human relationships. New videos every Wednesday that will touch your heart and perhaps reflect parts of your own journey.